In this video, you and I together are going to learn how to implement Tanstack Router in a React application. We're going to learn how to set it up, how to install the library, how to define our routes, how to set up file-based routing so that each file dictates the URL, how to handle dynamic parameters, how to handle search parameters, validate the search, how to load data in your components, and so much more. This video is going to be really educational, and I promise you, you are going to learn everything that you need about Tanstack Router. All right, cool. So let's begin. So here we're on the official documentation of Tanstack Router. If you didn't know, Tanstack Router is actually part of a bigger stack of libraries, which includes Tanstack Query, which you may know as React Query, as well as Tanstack Start, which is a new framework that's currently in beta, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So any library that's generally from Tanstack is a good library, and this router is no exception. So to get started, obviously, we're going to come here and click the Get Started button. And this is going to give us here some information about the router and how we actually come to it and what the benefits of it are. But what we want to do and what we care about the most is we want to go here to installation and actually get the steps required to install Tanstack Router in our application. So we are going to go and copy this command. We are using pnpm, but if you're using something else, just copy the correct command. We're going to go here to our VSCode, open up the terminal, and we are going to paste and install Tanstack Router in our application. Then once that's done, we can go back to the documentation and we should now go to the quick start to see how we can actually start implementing this. Now they do have some configuration here that you want to set up, and they also have some automatic configuration if you run this command. I'm not going to do it just because I want to show you the manual steps so that you kind of know what they are and understand them. But if you want to, after watching this video, do it this way by using this command, feel free to do so. It is just going to do all of the manual steps that I'm going to show you automatically, and you won't have to worry about it. So first, we want to come here and add the Vite plugin and the Tanstack Router DevTools. So we'll take this command as well, come here and just paste it, and we're going to install these DevTools as well. While that's going on, we can actually come in here and proceed. We have to actually add the plugin to our Vite config, which is this one, the Tanstack Router Vite plugin, and we just have to add it here next to our plugin. So let's copy this import just to make things a little bit simpler. You see here that it's installed, so we're fine. We're going to go here to vite.config.ts, open this up and see where we have plugins. I have a couple more plugins, maybe you might have as well. That's fine. I would just put this one. Let's first put the import here. I would just put this one at the top. Tanstack Router Vite like this, and just pass it here, and there we go. Now we've injected Tanstack Router in Vite, and now it's going to work with the Vite configuration and everything else that Vite does. Cool. So now with this, if you go back here to the documentation, maybe make this, actually no, what happened? Ooh, I messed that up. I tried to make it bigger, it didn't work, then it made it small. Anyways, we go here to the documentation, and now it's going to tell us to create the following files. So we have src routes and then underscore root.tsx. This is going to be our root layout, and that is going to define, as you're going to see, all of the other entry points of all of our other routes through a outlet component that we're going to see in just a moment. So let's first go here and create this. But first, I just want to talk about what it is that we're actually doing here. So what we're doing here is we're going to be creating files inside of src/routes. That is going to be a folder specifically for all of our routes. And then what's cool about that is we're going to be implementing file-based routing, which means that however we define our files inside of this routes folder over here is how our URL structure is going to look like. And you're going to see exactly what this means in practice when we implement it, but it's very important to note that we're going to be implementing file-based routing, and we're going to start here with this root tsx file. So let's come here back to our editor. We can close this and we can come here at the sidebar, go inside of src. We're going to create our routes folder. So we'll do routes like this. And inside of here, we're going to make a new file root.tsx like this. And now to make life a little bit simpler for ourselves, we're just going to copy this code directly from the documentation, because this is going to be enough for us to get started and to actually implement our routing and our custom functionality in our application. So let's paste it here, let's save, and now we have created our route layout. Now let's take a moment to just look at what this is actually doing, because this is important and this is going to show us how Tanstack Router is actually working. So everything works, again, is file-based routing, right? And then because we injected Tanstack into our Vite plugin, it is just going to automatically have access to our files, know exactly what we export, and is going to be able to use what we export in these files, like this route here that we're exporting, and then configure our routes and implement it based on the URL, right? So that's the first step, and that's important to know because it gives us background as to how this works. And then in our files, we actually have to export a root at every single file that we want to have a root as, right? And we're doing it here. We're exporting a root and it has to be called root. That is a requirement of Tanstack Router. And in the case of a layout, we're going to be using this create root function, which essentially is going to define that this is our root. And here we're just defining one component. This is a function and we're returning here some JSX, some markup, which has a couple of links. These are the native links to actually Tanstack Router, the same way you would have it in Next.js, for example. We have a link to home, we have a link to about, and then we have an outlet here, and then we have the Tanstack Router dev tools. Now, this outlet component over here, if you've never seen this before, if you haven't maybe perhaps worked with React Router also has an outlet component, and really the simplest way for you to think about it is just think of it as a slot that our roots are going to go, right? So if you think of this root here, this create root as a layout that is going to wrap all of our roots, this outlet here is going to place the actual root inside of this layout. And the reason why we want to do this is because we want to control how our root is actually rendered inside of our layout. Let's say, for example, that we wanted to do something like this. We want to put here a div, right? And then put the outlet inside of the div. And then inside of the div, we might want some classes. So like we'll do class name and we're going to add here padding and then 4, right? Maybe we want all of our roots in our application to have a padding of 4. So we will put this in a div and then we would put the outlet inside of the div. That way we can control how our roots actually look like. And Tanstack Router is going to take this layout here and then it's going to look at the URL. What URL are we currently on? And it is going to render in here the actual root that we want to render for that specific URL. So that's what this outlet component does. It's very important. So we can just remove this because we actually don't need this. And then here we have the Tanstack Router dev tools. This is optional, but they have a component here that you can use, and they provide you access to the dev tools, which we're going to see because we are going to be keeping this enabled. This is going to give you some information about the actual route that you're on, which is going to be very useful for actually debugging as you're building a project and implementing your routes. Cool. So now with this, we can actually start building some of our routes. So already you can see here, we have some links. We have a link to home and we have a link here to about, right? So we're going to need to be creating those. And if you go back here and look at the actual documentation, it is going to tell us to actually do something here, right? To some of these files, we're going to have index here and about. These map directly to our index here. This is the index, this is the home. And then we have the about over here, which also maps. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to be creating this index root over here. Now here it's specified as lazy, and I will show you what that is and what that means and when you want to use it. But first, we're going to do it actually without lazy, so you can see the difference between lazy and not lazy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come in here in our editor, and inside of roots over here, I'm going to create index.tsx, right? And in here, I'm just going to take this code over here, but I'm going to make some minor adjustments to it to show you what it means. So instead of create lazy file root, we're going to take this here. We're just going to do create file root. It's the same function, just without the lazy parameter. And then here, you're going to see that we have a type error. This is totally fine. As you can see here, argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of type never. We're going to deal with this in just a moment. But note what we've done here. So we've defined another file inside of our root. So this is going to be a root that we can navigate to. We've called it index. And then inside of the file, what we did is we also exported a root component, right? So now you can kind of see a pattern that we're developing here. Every single file root that we have will need to export a root component, a root property over here. This, instead of doing here, like we did create root, here we're going to do create file root, right? And this takes in an argument, which is going to be the actual path of our file. Because we're on the index path, this is going to be just a slash because that denotes the index path. And then we're going to pass it here a component, just like we did over here. We passed it here a component. The only difference here, we had it in line. Here we're creating a separate component. And then we have our component here, and this just returns some JSX and says h3 welcome home. Now, to actually deal with this, we're going to have to actually run our Vite dev server. And remember, because here in our Vite config, we actually put this Tanstack Router Vite, this is going to do some extra stuff when we run our dev server. And we want to do that because now you're going to see one of the most important parts of Tanstack Router and one of the parts that is actually providing the most benefit to Tanstack Router. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. Let's come here and let's do pnpm dev like this and just start our dev server. And you're going to see here, before we actually ran Vite over here, right, on our local host, we have some logs in here that said generating routes and then updating, and then we have this path over here, and then we have this file root3.gen.ts, right? And then here we're saying process root in 250 milliseconds. So let's look at this file, route3.gen.ts. If we go here, we have it here inside of our src, we have route3.gen.ts. So what is this file? So this file, as you can see here at the top, is a file that is automatically generated and managed by Tanstack Router. You should not make any changes in this file because they are going to be overridden. They are going to be overridden every single time that you make any change to any file inside of the root directory, and you're also running the dev project. But what this is actually doing is this did all of the work and all of the code for us to actually look in our roots folder over here, figure out what we have, what paths we have, what components we have, how this all works, and then it created here some variables, it created here some types that we'll have access to across our entire application. You can see here we have a bunch of types over here. We have children, and we have all of this configuration that we don't need to manage because Tanstack Router is doing it for us. And the benefit of that is now if we go back here to our actual roots, we're going to see that we no longer have any errors over here, right? Because now we actually have enhanced types. We have the correct types that match what we have in our router. And now if I come in here and I remove this and I pass it here a string like it expects, it is going to know that the only possible string that I can have, which means the only possible route that I can have is / is the index route. Because as you can see here, that is the only route that we have configured in this routes folder. And it knows this because again, it's injected into Vite, so it's going to work automatically. It has access to our files. And by this generated file, our entire application, our TypeScript, everything knows about each one of our roots, and we get incredible developer experience. We can just create a file root over here, define a path, and we can know for sure that we actually have a path and a file that match that specific root. This is one of the biggest benefits of using something like Tanstack Query, and again, it's managed automatically for you and you don't have to do anything. So now let's actually start creating other roots and see how this works, right? Because we can take this a bit further. So here we're going to take about.lazy and we're going to copy this code, and this time we are going to keep the lazy part, and I'm going to show you why. So we're going to come in here inside of our roots, we're going to come in here and we're going to make about.tsx, actually .lazy.tsx, because we want to make this lazy. Again, this lazy is optional, but we want to make this lazy. First of all, I hope that you've noticed this. I just created the file. I did not write or paste any code, right? I did have it copied, but if I pasted it, it would have been called root here, which is fine, but it would have been called about here. What was actually put here was not about, it was the root component. This is because as soon as you create a file, Tanstack Router is automatically going to run the code and it's going to regenerate this route3.gen.ts. And now if you look at this file, we're going to see that we actually now have our about lazy import, and we have here create file route about. It knows about our about page that we just created. I didn't have to write any code. It knows about it. It's here, right? It's automatically managed for us. Again, this is one of the benefits of using Tanstack Router, which means that we didn't even have to do this, right? But even if we wanted to, we came here and we just removed everything. We could have pasted everything. We could do this our way, right? And then if we come here and remove the string and then re-put it, now we have / and about, because again, it knows about our roots. So this is great, this works, and that's a huge benefit. Now on this create lazy file versus create file root, right, which pretty much do the same thing, the only difference between lazy is that when you make it lazy, the bundle is actually going to be split at this point, and this root over here is only going to get loaded in terms of the JavaScript bundle when you actually access that root. If you don't want this, then don't put lazy here and just put create file root, and that is going to be part of the main bundle. And then you can use this to configure how your bundle looks like, what you want to render, what you want to defer rendering and make it lazy. And you can really architect a nice solution across your entire application using these few handful functions, which ultimately makes it super easy. Cool. So now with this, we actually have enough to actually run the application. I mean, it is already running because all of this is working automatically, but to actually run this and see how this works in action, right? To actually see the fruit of our labor, if you will. So let's go here and let's go to localhost and let's refresh it. And now we have cause and solutions here, but I do remember we forgot one thing, right? And that is very important. Let's go back here to documentation. We need to do one more thing, which is to update the main.tsx file. What we're going to do to keep things simple, because our main.tsx main.tsx file is pretty simple. It's standard David configuration. I didn't do anything else to it. I'm just going to take all of this here and I'm going to go in my VS Code, open up main.tsx, and we're just going to paste everything here. And now we're going to save to just have everything formatted. And we just need to re-import the .index.css because that is going to make our Tailwind work and everything. But essentially what this has done is it's done, I think from what I see, two things here. It's first imported this route tree from routetree.gen, right? The automatic generated file for all of our Tanstack Router stuff. And then it also created this router over here. It passed it to the root tree. And then it also declares some types over here so that we can have access to this router globally as well. And then it just renders the app like normal. But instead here, we're just passing the router provider and we're passing the router instead of a component. That is why we were seeing cause and solutions before, because we had it to be a hard-coded component. But now if I go here, we have something different. We no longer have cause and solutions. We have Tanstack Router. So as you can see here, we're on home and then we have about over here. Home is being bolded because it's currently the active page. But if I go here to about, you're going to see that we have hello from about. Our navigation works. Our URL is also changing exactly as we expect every time that we type this, and things are working as we expect. And also at the bottom left over here, we have this Tanstack Router. These are the dev tools. If I press this and open this, we have some really cool stuff going here. We actually have data. Ignore these buttons that look weird. It's because I have like CSS that just globally applies to the project. It might look different, probably would look different for you, but we have all of these things here about the router, like the state, loaded at, is it loading, is it transitioning, is it status, right? If I go here to about, you're going to see that we're now on about, right? And things are just being updated here, and you have so much data that you can use to actually debug your application as you're building it. So this is one of the really cool things about Tanstack Router, right? They give you this component and you can just use it and it works and you never have to worry about it again. Cool. So now we're kind of done with the documentation. The rest of it is just really up to us. So we can even close this and we can now start building our own routes, adding some loaders, adding some dynamic parameters, some search params, validating everything and just making sure that everything works so that you can understand this and you can go and apply it to your own projects. So first, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in here inside of root, and now we're going to define here a folder, and we're going to call this one posts like this, because we're going to want to be implementing posts, write some dummy data just to show how this works, and we're going to put it here inside of a folder. Now, the way that file-based routing works, if you use Next.js or stuff like that, the folders and the file names actually affect the path of the URL. So now because we put posts over here in our URL, we can go to posts and we can access the files that are put within this folder, right? So that's how this works. So for example, we can come in here and we can do index.tsx, and you're going to see that immediately our component is created. And it also knows about posts over here, right? This is the index root of the post. And you're going to see here, we have hello from posts, right? So everything works automatically. We can change this to, let's say, for example, posts. If you wanted to, we can leave it to root component. It's completely up to you and how you want to define your variables across your project. And then in here, what we maybe want to do is do something like this, const posts, and then we're going to make this into an array. We're going to do post 1, post 2, post 3, and here we're just going to map over these posts. So we're going to do something like this, post.map post, and then for each post we're going to render here a div, and we're going to give it here key. That's going to be the post, and we're going to put here a link, which we're going to import from Tanstack Router. And here I'm going to show you how to actually link to something, but let's just put your post like this, and we're going to save. And now you're going to see how we can actually link to the actual individual post page to make that work. So to link to something, it is pretty simple. You just do to like this, and it's going to know, and then you make it equal to something. And now here you're going to see another one of the beauties of having this automatically generated TypeScript file, this route.gen. It knows to which routes I want to go. Right? We have here dot, we have dot, we have slash, we have about, and we have posts, right? These are all of the routes that we have now currently configured in our application. Now, what we're missing here is we're missing a route for the individual posts, right? So we haven't configured that, so we can't navigate to it. So before we do that, let's first navigate to our route, and let's first create, the route that has one post so that we can then navigate to it. So inside of posts here, we're going to create a new file, and this one, we're now going to make it, have it a dynamic parameter, and that is going to be using the $sign notation. And we're going to put your post ID .tsx. Doing this, you're going to see automatically creates a file for us once again. And now here we're /post/post ID. This is going to be a dynamic parameter, a dynamic URL parameter that is going to represent the post ID that we're currently trying to render. And we're going to be able to use that in this component and actually show that post and show all of its data if we were to perhaps fetch it from a backend or something similar. So now if you go back here to our index, now if you put here 2, you're going to see that we have something else. We have post/post ID, which is our newly created file or newly created root. Great, let's select it. And now to actually pass, we have here a type error. You're going to see that property params is missing in type children and then to post ID. It knows that post ID is a dynamic URL parameter, and so we need to specify it, and we haven't. It's smart enough to know and to actually give you all of these errors and all of these type errors. So to add the parameters, what we can do is we can do param like this, params, and this is going to be an object, and then we can do post ID. And again, it knows that we need a post ID, and we're going to pass it here simply the post like this, right? The post that we have, that's going to be post ID 1, post 2, and post 3. That's how this works. And now with this, what we want to maybe do is come in here to our nav bar here, to our root layout. And what we want to do is take this link and then put it here. And then instead of about to do posts, and then here do posts like this. And you're going to see that everything works. And now if you go back here to our application, we have posts, and now we have our list of posts, post 1, post 2, post 3. I can click on any post and you're going to see that we're on post/post 1. Right, we're on the actual individual page of the post. I can go back, I can put post 2, we're on post 2 over here, and we still have the same component, the same text. Now, obviously, this one is not yet aware of the post ID, which we're going to change in just a moment, but you can see that this works, and we've now created dynamic roots with dynamic parameters, and we know how to pass those parameters to our roots. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come here to our post ID, and we're actually going to make use of this post ID dynamic parameter, and I'm going to show you how to actually use it to either maybe load some data or just use it directly in the component. So let's start simple. Let's start just using it in the component and replacing this post ID with the actual post ID that we get from the root. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to be using a loader. So we're going to come in here and do loader like this, and this is then going to be an asynchronous function. So we're going to do an asynchronous function like this, and this one is then going to return to us something that we want to actually provide to this component. Loaders are basically to get the data that the component needs before actually using it and rendering the component. So this is a perfect place for us to actually return the post ID, and we're going to be able to access the post ID. So we're going to do here, we're going to return an object, and here we're going to do post ID, and this we're going to need to pass it here some post ID. Now, how do we get the post ID? Well, because we're using create file route, we actually get access in this function here to some arguments that would include the parameters passed to the specific root. For example, we have here params like this, which is going to be the actual parameters that we have here. And our parameters, because we have a post ID here, will also have params.postID, and its type string. You can see that we directly have access to it here. And then once we have this, once we're returning this, to access it in the component, all that we have to do is we're going to come in here and do const and then destructure our post ID. And that is going to be equal to root dot, and here we're going to use loader data, and we're just going to call it directly. We're going to use this root over here. It gives us access to a hook called use loader data, and this will give us access to the post ID, which we can directly come in here and we can just put post ID like this, and we can save. And now if we go back to our application, you're going to see that we have hello post 2, hello post 2, right? If I go back here and I put it here to post 3, we have hello post 3, and then we have hello post 1. Everything works exactly as we expect. Now this loader over here, because it is an asynchronous function, is actually the place where you would load your data that you would need for this component. Let's say, for example, that you had a fetch request. I'm not going to do it, but let's say that you had something like await and then new promise, and then we're going to do here resolve, and here we're going to do set timeout, and we're going to do resolve, and here we're going to put, let's say, 1 second, right? Let's say that this was actually fetching some data from a backend, right? You would have access to params.postID, so the actual post ID, to send it to your function to actually fetch some data. And then you're going to await that data, and then you're going to return the data here, and you're going to have access to it inside of this through this use loader data component. That's how you can load any data inside of your application using Tanstack Router. Now, if you go here and just reload this page, you're going to see that we're going to wait for 1 second before our actual data is here. right? But we can actually improve this by providing a better user experience. What we can do is we can come in here and provide a pending component, and we can pass it here just any component. So we can do here div and then loading ... And now we have a pending component that is going to get rendered as we are loading our data, right? So as we're loading our data, we're going to have a component, and we can customize this component in any way that we want. Besides loading component, we can also do error component. So come here and then just do error. So we're going to do error like this, and here we're going to put error like this, right? So something went wrong. And here we're just going to do throw new error. And we're going to just throw a new error. We're not going to specify any message. And with this, now as we fetch, we're going to see we have error. We also have loading, but we have error. We have loading and we have error, and everything works exactly as one would expect. Cool. So now with this, I'm just going to remove the error so that we actually have it working. The last thing that I want to show you is how to handle search parameters in the URL and how to pass those to the component. For that, we're going to have to come back here to the posts, because here it makes a little bit more sense to have search parameters. And now we're going to update this file here, this route here, to accept search parameters and use them in this component, and actually even a filter for the posts if we have a search. So first, let's come here to our root, and where we're defining our link to go to posts, let's come here and actually add a search property, which we can do. And this is going to be an object. And in here, we're just going to do something like Q, and here we're going to make it post1. We're essentially going to be using this Q as our query, right? That is going to represent our query. And we're going to want to use this to actually filter the posts that we show inside of this file root over here. So right now, this component is a simple root. It doesn't have any context of a search, but we can actually come in here and change that by adding here validate search. This is a property that we can have, and this will receive the search over here. And that is going to be all of the search parameters of this specific root. And inside of here, we can actually return and validate our search and convert it into any value that we want. For example, we can come in here and do return, and we're going to return here Q, and Q is going to be search.q. And here we're going to do as a string, because again, this might not be there. And if it is there, we want to automatically cast it to a string. And then here we're going to do otherwise an empty string. So we're going to default Q to an empty string if it is not there. But if it is there, we're actually going to cast it as a string and return it from our validate search function. Now, to then access the validate search and pass it here to our components, we're going to have to go through 2 steps before that, and you're going to see why, because it does make more sense. So first, we're going to want to access it in a loader, right? Just like we did here to access the actual parameters in a loader, we also might want to access the search in a loader, because we might want to send those to our backend to only return to us the results that match that query, right? So we're going to want to do that. But to get the search inside of a loader, you don't just directly get it here next to params like we did before. If I put in here search, you're going to see that there's nothing there, right? There's no search over here. Instead, what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to put it in loader depths, the loader dependencies. So we're going to do here loader depths, and that is going to be a function again. And this one is going to take in here a search, and that is going to be an object with Q over here. And I believe I made a mistake. Let me just see exactly how I've done it. No, I think this is fine. And this is going to be here an arrow, and that is going to return to us just an object with Q like this. So essentially, our search over here is accessible in loader depths. So that's how we're going to get access to the search. In contrary to over here, where we got params through our loader, the search is going to be through loader depths. We're going to have the search. And then we're just returning what we care about in the search in these dependencies here to then use in our loader. So this Q over here is going to be our query that is now going to be accessible inside of our loader. So now if we go here to loader, and now we pass this here as a function, and this one is going to take over here, it's going to be an asynchronous function. So we're going to do asynchronous, and that is going to be over here. Inside of here, we're going to access an object, and we're going to access the depths property. So the dependencies, the loader depths that we created here. And this one, we're going to destructure it, and we're going to pass it here Q, which is going to be a string. And the reason why it knows about Q is because we returned it from this loader depths function. Again, all of this is completely type safe, right? So that's the benefit of doing this. You define your function here, you told it what the dependencies are, and so they're going to be available directly here in this depths. And now what we can do with this, because we have access to it in our loader, we can either use the Q to send it to our backend, or we can just return it to be able to use in our component. It's up to us. So what we can do is we can actually come in here, and we're going to move our posts. We're going to put our posts inside of the loader, and then we're going to return a filtered version of the post. So we're going to return here an object, and we're going to do posts. And here we're going to do posts.filter. And then for each post, we're going to do only return the post if the post is equal to our queue, like this, right? That is what we're going to return from our loader. So now in here, we need our posts, right? So how do we get our posts? So we're going to come in here and we're going to be able to do const posts equals use loader data. It's actually route.use loader data. And here, now we have access to our post, and you're going to see that this is an array of strings because again, everything is properly typed. And then if you want to access our search, because we can also access this, we're going to be able to do const, and here we're going to do queue, and that is going to be route.use search. Use search. There you go. Right now we have access to queue. And again, it is going to be properly typed as a string because that is exactly what we returned over here, right? Our queue is going to be a string. In any case, we return it in the loader depths. We have access to it in our loader, and then we can access it in a component and do whatever we want with it. So now if you go back here to our application, we're going to go back here to home. And now when I go to posts, you're going to see that, oh, we have a data over here. If I go here to posts, you sometimes need to reload to like make sure everything works. If I go here to posts, we're only going to see post 1, right? If I click post 1, it's still working. We're put here in post 1. That's totally fine. But if I now come in here to our root and change this to post 2, for example, and save, now when I go to posts, you're going to see we're going to have post 2. It didn't refresh. We have to refresh. If I go here to posts, now we have post 2. Why do we not have it? I put here, I didn't save this file. That was my mistake. We're going to go back here, posts, and now we're seeing post 2, right? This works exactly as we expect. And that in a nutshell is how Tanstack Router works. You define your root route. You have a component. You can put any sort of layout in here that you want. You have your outlet, you have your dev tools. Then you define routes using a file-based structure. You don't have to do that. You can also do it using code. You can look at the documentation on how to do that, but you can define, and you should define them through routes. It's generally the recommended approach. You define your files, those get mapped to routes, and then you create here your route using create file route or create lazy route. It gives you access to all of these things that you can use to get data, validate search, get your parameters, load your data, and then pass them to your components as you need, and then render your components, and Tanstack Router is going to handle everything for you automatically. It's beautiful. It's a great library. I highly recommend it. And I will now be using this in my projects because I generally believe that it's a superior library. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure to leave this video a big thumbs up. You can click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Darius Kozden. This is Kozden Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.